My name is Arthur, and at 67, I carry a weight that no scale in the world can accurately measure. For 4 decades, my horizon was limited to 4 cold concrete walls and the metallic clang of a gate that closed punctually at 6 p.m., marking the end of another wasted day. Today, when I look at my hands marked by time, I don't just see the wrinkled skin of an old man, but the trail of a man who destroyed his own future in 300 seconds of pure insanity. I had everything a simple man could want: a home, a wife who loved me, and a baby daughter who still smelled of powder. Yet I traded every hug, every birthday, and every sunset for the darkness of a damp, lonely cell that swallowed me alive forever. Many people believe that life ends only when the heart stops beating, but I'm here to tell you that the worst death is the one that happens while you're still breathing. I spent 40 years being a ghost of myself, watching the world turn out there while I rotted inside, fed only by the poison of bitter regret. I'm not here to ask for your pity or to invent cheap excuses about what I did on that rainy afternoon that changed the course of my existence. My goal is much more urgent and visceral than simply telling a personal drama. I want you to see through my tired eyes the abyss that hides behind a single moment of uncontrolled rage. If you listen to me carefully, you will finally understand the real price of your own blind pride. Before that Tuesday arrived, my world was made of metal, grease, and the rhythmic sound of engines coming back to life. I was a respected mechanic in our working-class neighborhood, the kind of man everyone sought out when their car coughed or refused to start on cold mornings. My hands were permanently stained with oil, but my soul felt clean and light like a Sunday breeze. I vividly remember the smell of the percolated coffee my wife would make early on, filling every crack of our humble little house with a promise of comfort. The sound of my 6-month-old daughter's rattle was the melody that guided my tired steps at the end of each long day of hard work. I was the center of a small but solid universe where problems were always solved with wrenches and patience. However, behind that routine of honesty and strength, there was a trait I dangerously confused with honor: my reactive pride. I grew up believing that a real man never bows his head to anyone and that respect must be maintained at any cost. This need to be the unshakable pillar of the house made me see any affront as a personal attack on my own dignity. I didn't know how to back down. To me, taking a step back was a sign of weakness in the eyes of others and myself. This internal rigidity was like tempered glass, strong against constant pressure but destined to shatter into 1,000 pieces when hit by the exact right impact. I walked through life with blind confidence, never realizing I was carrying the fuel needed for my own fire. In those days, the future looked like a long, paved road full of sunny Sundays with backyard barbecues and the slow growth of my little girl. There was a sense of security that was almost arrogant in the way I planned the coming decades, as if fate were under my absolute control. The blue-collar environment where we lived reinforced this image of me as an upright man, someone who protected his own with tooth and nail if truly necessary. No one could have predicted that this normality would be violently torn from me because of a simple and trivial mishap. I was the master of my fate, or at least that's what I firmly believed as I closed the shop on that gray afternoon. Little did I know that would be the last day I'd feel the real warmth of a home. The rain was falling thin and persistent on that Tuesday afternoon, turning the asphalt into a black, treacherous mirror that reflected the dim lights of the street lamps. I was exhausted, my body aching for the rest of the sofa and my wife's embrace, while the rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers against the glass was the only soundtrack. Suddenly, a car cut me off abruptly, forcing me to slam on the brakes to avoid an imminent collision. My heart raced, and the survival instinct flared up like a flame that consumes everything around it. I honked, a long sound loaded with frustration, expecting just a sign of an apology. However, the driver ahead stopped the vehicle in the middle of the road and shouted an insult that wounded my pride. Instead of ignoring the offense and continuing my way home, I stopped the car, feeling the blood pulse with deafening force in my temples. My right hand fumbled on the floor and found the cold, heavy metal of the lug wrench, an object I knew so well by its raw texture. The smell of wet asphalt mixed with diesel fumes invaded my nostrils as soon as I opened the door, creating a thick and suffocating atmosphere. I got out of the car with my mind clouded by a blind rage I never knew I possessed. What followed were 5 minutes of brutal aggression, where the dry sound of breaking bones mixed with the noise of the constant rain. I no longer saw a man in front of me, but an obstacle that had to be removed. The last blow was followed by a silence that seemed to freeze time around me, leaving only the sound of water hitting the cold metal. The other man was down, motionless in the middle of a puddle that was rapidly changing color, turning a dark, viscous red under the pale light of the headlights. The look of absolute terror he gave me before silencing forever remained etched in my retina like a deep scar that would never close. At that moment, the weight of the lug wrench in my hand became unbearable, as if I were carrying the weight of the entire world on a single arm. The fury vanished as quickly as it had arisen, giving way to a sense of emptiness and total irreversibility. I knew without a doubt that the door to my life had just closed. The silence that followed the final blow was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my entire life. I stood there, rain washing my face, but unable to clean the stain I had just carried into my soul. I looked at my hands and saw the blood of that stranger mixed with the black grease of my daily work, a combination that seemed to seal my fate once and for all. At that exact moment, the image of my wife setting the table for dinner flashed through my mind like a sharp, icy blade. I knew that the plate of warm food and the warmth of our arrival hug had become memories of a life that no longer belonged to me. The air around me seemed to have been replaced by a heavy, suffocating lead that kept me from breathing normally. In the distance, the sound of the first sirens began to cut through the night, initially like a faint wail, and then like a piercing scream announcing the end of my freedom. The blue and red lights began to reflect in the puddles on the street, creating a macabre spectacle that illuminated the body lying on the ground and my own failure. It was there, as the officers approached with their authoritative voices and guns drawn, that I understood the door to my house had closed forever. I was no longer Arthur, the detail-oriented mechanic or the dedicated father. I was now just a number, a defendant, another statistic of urban violence driven by ego. Reality collapsed on my shoulders with the force of an entire mountain of cold concrete. When the metal of the handcuffs tightened around my wrists, I felt a chill that didn't come from the rain, but from a place deep inside my chest that would never be warm again. The journey to the station was a blur of lights and shadows, where every meter traveled pulled me miles away from the dignity I had spent years building with sweat. I looked out the window of the squad car and saw ordinary people walking under their umbrellas, oblivious to the fact that, in just 5 minutes, I had become a stranger. Guilt began to gnaw at my insides like a corrosive acid as reality hit me. My daughter would grow up calling another man Daddy. In that initial isolation cell, loneliness embraced me with a rigor I never imagined could exist. The first year in prison was an exercise in slow mental torture, where every second seemed to last an eternity of silence and concrete. I remember the day I received the divorce papers. The paper was white, cold and sharp as a razor blade against my calloused skin. Along with them came a single photograph of my daughter, who was already starting to lose the baby features I kept in my memory. I spent hours touching that image with the tips of my dirty fingers, trying to feel the warmth of her skin through the crumpled paper, yellowed by cruel time. The realization that I would not be allowed to see her grow, take her first steps, or hear her voice calling for her father was a daily punch to my aching, hollow stomach. When I finished 10 years of prison, news of my father's death arrived via a brief and impersonal letter delivered by an indifferent guard. There was no phone call, no hug of consolation, or the chance to look at his face one last time before the earth covered him forever. I imagined the wake, the empty chairs where I should have been, and the weight of the coffin I didn't have the right to carry on my shoulders. The forgiveness I wanted so badly to ask for got stuck in my throat, turning into a permanent knot of sadness and deep remorse. That night, the sound of the bars closing felt heavier, as if every lock confirmed that I was losing my roots. I was now a man without a father and without a past to ever return to. Reaching the 20th year was like walking through a thick fog that erased the colors of my original identity slowly and cruelly. The prison mirror, a sheet of polished and scratched metal, revealed a man I could barely recognize as myself. My hair, once dark and thick, was now thin white strands, framing a face marked by invisible scars of bitterness. Meanwhile, the world outside was transforming into a technological and strange place, which I observed only through brief glimpses on the news of the Wing's collective television. I felt like an old, rusty gear thrown into a dark corner of a workshop that no longer existed. Loneliness was no longer a visitor. It was my only faithful companion through sleepless nights. In the 30th year of isolation, the pain took a new and even more devastating form through fragmented conversations with other inmates and rare visitors. I discovered, through third parties, that my daughter had gotten married and that, at the ceremony, my name wasn't even mentioned as her biological father. I had been replaced by a shameful absence, an empty space she preferred to ignore to build her own happiness far from my shadow. I imagined her dressed in white, walking toward the altar, while I remained sitting on a concrete bench, surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. The realization that I was just a dirty secret, forgotten by my own bloodline, was the hardest blow I ever received. My legacy was not work, but a trail of blood. 40 years later, the gate of the penitentiary opened to return me to a freedom that weighed much more than any punishment cell. I stepped out into a world where I was a ghost, an anachronism, walking among people who didn't take their eyes off small glowing screens in their hands. I had no home to go to, no friends, and no place where my presence wasn't seen with suspicion and fear. My trembling hands tried to understand how to use a smartphone for the first time, feeling like an alien on a planet I helped build but didn't inhabit. Freedom was a vast and empty field where the silence of my conscience spoke louder than the noise of the streets. I was free from the bars, but I remained a prisoner of my own ego. For 40 years, I lived in a mental battlefield where my pride fought a losing war against crushing regret. At first, I used to tell myself I was only defending my honor, that no man should be insulted without reacting, and that I did what any real man would do. I clung to that lie because it was the only thing that kept me from crumbling under the weight of my own cruelty and stupidity. But as the years turned into decades, that justification began to sound like a hollow echo in a dark cave. I realized that the honor I thought I was protecting was just a fragile ego that demanded blood to feel even minimally powerful. I traded my daughter's laughter and the peace of my home for a ghostly concept that gave me nothing The dominant emotion in my days was not just guilt, but a vast and icy void that swallowed everything I once was. I finally managed to see the pattern that imprisoned me long before the real bars appeared: the inability to stay silent and the toxic desire to have the last word. I spent my youth building a wall of respect through hard work, only to tear it down in minutes of madness over a trivial insult on a rainy street. I am the villain of my own story, and accepting that truth was more painful than any physical punishment prison could offer. I look at my reflection and see the man who killed not only a stranger, but the father, the husband, and the friend I should have been. The empty chair at my daughter's wedding is my monument. It happened on a sunny afternoon, a few weeks after finally being returned to the world of the living. I sat on a wooden bench in a wooded park just to observe the movement of people and try to understand how life continued to be so vibrant without my presence. Suddenly, my eyes fixed on a woman walking not far from there, holding the hand of two small children who were laughing under the sun. My heart, which I thought had turned to cold stone in my cell, gave a violent jolt inside my chest. I saw in her the exact features of my wife's face, mixed with an adult version of that baby from the yellowed photograph. It was her, my daughter, living a whole life that I could only imagine in my deepest and most painful dreams. I watched her from a distance, maintaining the safe distance a condemned man must have from the happiness of others. I noticed how she smiled at her youngest son, a gesture of sweetness I never had the chance to give her because I chose to hold a lug wrench instead of her small hand. To that woman and to those children, I was just an old stranger, a man of tired and possibly dangerous appearance, sitting in the shadow of a tree. It was at that moment that the painful realization hit me with the force of a final verdict. The 5 minutes of fury didn't just take that victim's life. They killed the Arthur who should have been the grandfather of those children. The real cost of my impulse was being erased forever from their memory. The lesson that life imposed on me through 4 decades of silence is as simple as it is devastating. Controlling a single minute is worth much more than the freedom of a lifetime. Frequently, we believe that reacting to an offense or not letting ourselves be humbled is a test of strength when, in reality, it is the greatest demonstration of weakness a man can commit. Patience is not just a passive virtue. It is the insurance we pay not to become permanent prisoners of our own hands and our lowest impulses. I discovered in the cruelest way possible that it only takes a few seconds of hot blood to melt all the years of sweat and effort it took to build your character. There is no real victory in a confrontation that costs you your peace of soul. I learned too late that the ego is the most expensive and cruel master there is, demanding payments that no bank account can cover. We live in a world that encourages us to defend our supposed honor at any cost, but no one warns us that true honor lies in the ability to breathe deep and move on in the face of trivial injustice. Today, I would trade any fleeting sense of victory on that wet asphalt for the simple right to be sitting at the table with my family, listening to the everyday sound of spoons hitting the plates. True courage is not in closing your fist to respond, but in having the self-mastery to keep your hands in your pockets and your feet on the path back home. The price of impulsive reaction is the loss of dignity. Perhaps you are watching this now and thinking you would never be capable of doing what I did, believing there is a safe distance between your life and my cold cell. But let me tell you something the prison walls taught me with absolute clarity. The monster of rage does not only inhabit evil men, it sleeps in the silence of anyone who places their own pride above reason. Have you already felt that sudden heat rising up your neck when someone cut you off in traffic or insulted you for no apparent reason? That is the exact moment when your future is in real and immediate danger. Do not make the fatal mistake of believing you have control of the situation while your blood is boiling. Everything you love can be snatched away in less time than it takes to drink a coffee. I left that prison, but the truth is, I never stopped being a prisoner of the man I was on that rainy afternoon. The freedom I carry today is a heavy shadow, a constant reminder that time does not come back and that forgiveness sometimes is a door we lock from the inside. If you still have the chance to go home today, to hug those who wait for you, and to ignore the small affronts of the world, do it with all your soul. Do not let 5 minutes of blind fury erase decades of love and family history. If today were the last day to look into the eyes of those you love, would you still give so much importance to that stranger who offended you? What have you already almost lost because of a moment of anger? Leave your honest comment and let's talk.